Welcome to War Bios, the podcast that delves into the intricacies of military history's most pivotal conflicts. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're embarking on an exploration of one of the most decisive battles in American history, the Siege of Yorktown, 1781. This epic confrontation marked a turning point in the American Revolutionary War as the combined forces of American and French troops trapped and ultimately forced the surrender of the British Army under General Charles Cornwallis. The American Revolution had been raging since 1775, with the Continental Army, led by George Washington, facing off against the British military in a series of grueling battles and strategic retreats. By 1780, the war had shifted southward, with British forces seeking to exploit the divided loyalties of the southern colonies. It was amidst this complex web of alliances and rivalries that the seeds of Yorktown were sown. In the spring of 1780, British General Sir Henry Clinton launched a campaign to capture Charleston, South Carolina, which fell on May 12 after a grueling siege. This victory gave the British control over the southern port cities and facilitated their push into the interior. However, it also set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to their downfall. The British strategy, aimed at securing the loyalty of Southern colonists, proved ineffective as they struggled to maintain control over the vast territories. Meanwhile, Washington's Continental Army had been bolstered by the arrival of French troops under the command of General Jean-Baptiste Donatien de Vimard, Comte de Rochambeau. The French alliance, formalized in 1778, had provided a significant boost to the American cause, and the combined forces were now poised to strike back against the British. The summer of 1781 found General Cornwallis, then stationed in Wilmington, North Carolina, receiving orders from General Clinton to establish a naval base in Virginia. This decision would prove fateful, as it drew the British Army into a trap set by Washington and Rochambeau. The French fleet, under the command of Admiral François-Joseph Paul de Grasse, had sailed from the West Indies to blockade the British naval base at Yorktown, effectively cutting off Cornwallis's escape route. As we explore the earliest history of the Siege of Yorktown, we find ourselves in the sweltering summer of 1781, with the stage set for a dramatic confrontation. The very landscape itself seemed to conspire against the British. The swampy lowlands, the winding rivers, and the fortified redoubts all awaited their arrival. The town of Yorktown, situated on a peninsula between the York River and the Chesapeake Bay, was a strategic location that controlled access to the bay and the surrounding countryside. The British Army, consisting of approximately 9,000 troops, began constructing defensive earthworks around Yorktown in August 1781. However, their preparations were soon disrupted by the arrival of Washington's Continental Army and Rochambeau's French forces, which had marched from New York to Virginia. The combined American and French army, numbering over 16,000 troops, was a formidable force that would ultimately prove too strong for the British to overcome. The primary events of the siege are about to unfold, with all their drama, intrigue, and consequence. The summer of 1781 had seen General Cornwallis's British Army establishing a defensive position in Yorktown, Virginia, while Washington's Continental Army and Rochambeau's French forces were marching towards them with a combined strength of over 16,000 troops. As the American and French armies approached Yorktown, they began to implement a clever strategy designed to trap the British and prevent their escape. The French fleet, under Admiral de Grasse, had successfully blockaded the British naval base at Yorktown, cutting off Cornwallis's potential escape route by sea. Meanwhile, Washington and Rochambeau led their armies in a series of swift and decisive maneuvers, aiming to encircle the British and force them into a desperate situation. One of the most critical moments in the siege came on September 5, 1781. When the French fleet clashed with a British naval force under Admiral Thomas Graves in the Battle of the Chesapeake. As the siege tightened, Washington's and Rochambeau's forces worked tirelessly to construct a complex network of trenches, earthworks, and redoubts around Yorktown. The British, realizing their predicament, attempted several breakout maneuvers but were consistently repelled by the combined American and French forces. The landscape itself seemed to work against the British, with the swampy lowlands and winding rivers limiting their movements and providing cover for the besieging armies. The siege was marked by numerous daring raids and skirmishes, as both sides sought to gain an advantage in the deteriorating situation. One notable example is the bravery of the French troops who stormed Redoubt 9, a key British defensive position, on October 14, 1781. The successful capture of this redoubt allowed the American and French forces to move their artillery closer to the British lines, further tightening the noose around Yorktown. The increasing desperation of the British situation was evident in Cornwallis's attempts to escape across the York River to Gloucester Point, where a smaller British force under General Charles O'Hara was stationed. However, a violent storm on October 16 destroyed or disabled much of the British fleet, making this option impossible and sealing the fate of the army trapped in Yorktown. As the days passed, the conditions within the besieged city grew more dire. Food and water were scarce, disease spread rapidly through the crowded trenches, and morale plummeted among the British troops. Recognizing the futility of their situation, General Cornwallis attempted to negotiate a surrender on October 17, 1781. After several days of negotiations, the terms of the surrender were agreed upon, and on October 19, 1781, the British Army marched out of Yorktown between two lines of American and French troops, laying down their arms in defeat. The surrender at Yorktown marked a decisive turning point in the American Revolutionary War. Although fighting would continue for nearly 2 more years, the defeat of the British Army at Yorktown convinced many in Britain that the war was unwinnable, paving the way for eventual peace negotiations and American independence. The bravery, perseverance, and strategic genius displayed by the men who fought at Yorktown have left an enduring legacy that continues to inspire and inform military strategy to this day. The surrender of General Cornwallis's British Army on October 19, 1781, marked a decisive turning point in the American Revolutionary War, convincing many in Britain that the war was unwinnable and paving the way for eventual peace negotiations. In the immediate aftermath of the siege, Washington's Continental Army and Rochambeau's French forces remained in Virginia to ensure that the British did not attempt to renege on their surrender. The British troops, meanwhile, were marched to prisoner-of-war camps in Virginia and Maryland, where they would remain until they could be exchanged for American prisoners or repatriated to Britain. As news of the Yorktown surrender spread throughout the colonies, it sparked widespread celebrations and a growing sense of confidence among the American people. The victory at Yorktown had demonstrated that the Continental Army, with the support of its French allies, was capable of defeating even the most formidable British forces. This newfound confidence would play a crucial role in the coming months as American diplomats worked to negotiate a formal peace treaty with Britain. One of the key figures in these negotiations was Benjamin Franklin, who had been serving as the American ambassador to France since 1776. Franklin's diplomatic skills and personal charm had played a significant role in securing French support for the American cause, and he would continue to play a leading role in the peace negotiations. In April 1782, Franklin, along with John Adams and John Jay, traveled to Paris to begin formal negotiations with the British government. The British team, led by David Hartley, was authorized to offer generous terms to the Americans, including recognition of independence and territorial concessions. However, the American negotiators held out for even more favorable terms, seeking to ensure that their new nation would be secure and prosperous. After months of intense negotiations, the Treaty of Paris was finally signed on September 3, 1783. The treaty recognized American independence, established the boundaries of the new nation, and provided for the withdrawal of British troops from American soil. It was a momentous occasion, marking the formal birth of the United States as a sovereign nation. The years following the Treaty of Paris were marked by significant challenges for the young American nation. The Continental Army was disbanded, and many of its soldiers returned to civilian life, seeking to rebuild their communities and start new businesses. The government of the United States, meanwhile, faced the daunting task of establishing a functional system of governance, including a constitution, laws, and institutions. Despite these challenges, the legacy of Yorktown continued to inspire and motivate the American people. The bravery and perseverance displayed by Washington's troops during the siege had set a high standard for American military valor, and the strategic genius of the Continental Army's leaders would serve as a model for future generations of American officers. The victory at Yorktown marked a turning point in the Revolutionary War, convincing Britain to seek peace and paving the way for American independence. The diplomatic maneuvers and political intrigues that followed would ultimately lead to the birth of a new nation, founded on the principles of liberty, democracy, and self-governance. In conclusion, the aftermath of Yorktown was a period of great significance in American history, marked by intense diplomacy, challenging governance, and the establishment of a new nation. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.